The morning sun cast long shadows across the private terminal of JFK International Airport as Dr. Maya Thompson checked her watch. 9:30 a.m. sharp. She adjusted her navy blue blazer and gripped her leather briefcase, which contained important papers for her upcoming United Nations speech. At 42 years old, Dr. Thompson had become used to early morning flights, but today felt different. The private terminal stood quiet and elegant, with its marble floors and tall glass windows. Only a few other travelers moved through the space, mostly older white men in expensive suits. They walked past with their phones pressed to their ears, barely noticing the distinguished black woman in their midst. Dr. Thompson had started her day like any other. She woke up at 5 a.m. in her Manhattan apartment, went through her morning exercise routine, and checked on 3 of her patients through video calls. As one of the world's best brain surgeons, she never truly stopped working. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from hospitals around the world, asking for her expert opinion on difficult cases. Today's schedule looked busy but manageable. First, she needed to fly to Geneva for her UN speech about healthcare equality. Then, she would perform a complicated surgery in Paris the next morning. Her private jet made these trips possible. It was the only way she could save lives across different continents without wasting precious time in regular airport lines. Walking toward the security checkpoint, Dr. Thompson thought about her journey. 20 years ago, she had been a young medical student, studying late into the night while working 2 jobs to pay for her education. Now, she owned patents for 3 different surgical techniques that had saved thousands of lives. Last month, Time magazine had featured her on its cover, calling her the miracle worker of modern medicine. The click of her sensible heels echoed through the terminal as she approached the security desk. She had all her papers ready: her pilot's flight plan, her jet's registration, her medical credentials, and her passport. After hundreds of similar flights, this process usually took less than 5 minutes. Dr. Thompson noticed the security guard watching her. His name tag read Gerald Brooks, and his eyes narrowed as she came closer. She gave him her usual warm smile, the same one she used to comfort nervous patients before surgery. But something in his expression made her pause. His face showed disbelief mixed with something else, something she had seen too many times before. The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted her perfectly pressed clothes, her simple pearl earrings, and the small gold pin on her lapel showing she had won the Global Medical Achievement Award. Everything about her appearance spoke of success and professionalism, from her short, neatly styled hair to her minimal makeup. Other travelers continued to pass through the terminal. A flight attendant rushed past with a coffee in hand. 2 pilots chatted near the window about weather conditions. The cleaning staff quietly moved around with their equipment. It seemed like a normal morning at JFK's private terminal. Dr. Thompson reached for her documents, ready to present them to Brooks. In her mind, she quickly reviewed her schedule. The UN speech started at 6 p.m. Geneva time, giving her plenty of time to prepare once she landed. Her team had already sent her latest patient scans to her tablet, which she planned to study during the flight. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, everything would change. She didn't know that her normal Thursday morning was about to become international news. She couldn't have guessed that her experience would soon spark a nationwide conversation about prejudice and privilege in private aviation. Standing there in her expensive suit, holding her briefcase filled with life-saving research, Dr. Maya Thompson was about to face something that no amount of medical training could have prepared her for. The next few moments would test not just her patience, but her belief in humanity's ability to change. The security guard leaned forward in his chair, his face set in a hard expression. Dr. Thompson took one more step toward his desk, ready to hand over her documents. The peaceful morning was about to shatter, and a new chapter in her remarkable life story was about to begin. Gerald Brooks stood up from his security desk, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Without even looking at Dr. Thompson's outstretched documents, he held up his hand in a stopping motion. "Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong place," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet terminal. "This area is for private jet clients only." Dr. Thompson kept her hand steady, still holding out her papers. "Yes, I know. I'm here for my 10:30 a.m. flight to Geneva. All my documentation is right here," she replied calmly. Years of handling stressful surgeries had taught her to keep her voice level, even when facing unfair treatment. Brooks crossed his arms and looked her up and down. "Listen, the main terminal for regular flights is in the other building. I can call someone to escort you there. His tone carried a hint of satisfaction, as if he enjoyed telling her she didn't belong. A few feet away, an older white businessman walked through without showing any ID. Brooks nodded at him with a smile. "Good morning, sir. Have a pleasant flight." The contrast in treatment was obvious to everyone nearby. Dr. Thompson took a deep breath. "Mr. Brooks," she said, reading his name tag again, "I understand you're doing your job, but I am Dr. Maya Thompson. This is my flight plan, my jet's registration, and my identification." She spread the documents on his desk one by one, her movements deliberate and professional. Brooks barely glanced at the papers. "Anyone can print fake documents," he said with a smirk. "I've worked here for 15 years. I know what our clients look like." He pushed the papers back toward her, some of them falling to the floor. The terminal had grown quieter. Other travelers stopped to watch the scene unfold. A young mother pulled her children closer, whispering something in their ears. Two pilots standing nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. Dr. Thompson's phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably another medical emergency requiring her attention. But right now, she had to deal with this situation. She pulled up her phone and opened her website. "Perhaps this will help," she said, showing Brooks the screen with her photo and credentials. "A website? Really?" Brooks laughed. "Listen, ma'am, if you don't leave, I'll have to call airport police. We take security very seriously here." He reached for his radio, his hand resting on it threateningly. More people had gathered around now. Some had their phones out, recording the interaction. Dr. Thompson noticed a young flight attendant staring at her with wide eyes, recognition slowly dawning on her face. "Mr. Brooks," Dr. Thompson tried one more time, "I have performed surgery on 3 continents this week alone. There are patients waiting for me in Geneva. My jet is registered under Thompson Medical Solutions. You can verify all of this." Her voice remained steady, but her hands had started to shake slightly. Brooks picked up his radio. "Security to main desk. We have a situation here. Someone refusing to leave the private terminal." He emphasized the word "someone" in a way that made his prejudice clear. A cleaning lady who had been working nearby stopped mopping. She had seen Dr. Thompson many times before, always greeting her with kindness. Now she stood frozen, her mop dripping quietly onto the marble floor. The morning sun continued to stream through the terminal windows, creating long shadows that stretched across the floor. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background. Time seemed to slow down as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Dr. Thompson thought about her patients waiting in Geneva, about her speech at the UN, about all the barriers she had broken to get where she was. She had faced discrimination before, but this felt different. This time, there were witnesses. This time, people were recording. This time, maybe something would change. The young flight attendant had pulled out her phone too, but she wasn't just recording. She was frantically typing something, her eyes darting between her screen and Dr. Thompson. In just a few moments, everything would change, but right now, the tension in the terminal could be cut with a knife. The tension in the terminal reached its peak as 2 airport police officers approached the security desk. Brooks straightened his uniform, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He clearly thought the situation would now go his way. "Officers, this woman refuses to leave the private terminal," Brooks said, pointing at Dr. Thompson. "She claims she owns a private jet." He laughed as he said the last part, making it clear how ridiculous he thought this was. The younger of the 2 officers, Officer Sarah Chen, stepped forward. "Ma'am, could you please show us your identification?" Her tone was professional, unlike Brooks's mocking one. As Dr. Thompson reached for her documents again, the number of people recording on their phones had grown. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Isn't that the famous brain surgeon from the Time magazine cover?" The whispers grew louder. More phones came out. Someone said, "My sister's friend was her patient." Another voice added, "She saved the Prime Minister of Japan last month." Brooks's smile began to fade as he noticed the changing atmosphere. The older police officer, seeing all the phones recording, spoke into his radio. "Command, we might have a situation developing here. Multiple civilians recording." Meanwhile, the young flight attendant who had been typing frantically finally spoke up. Her voice shook with excitement and anger. "That's Dr. Maya Thompson. She's performed over 3,000 successful brain surgeries. She's speaking at the United Nations today." The flight attendant held up her phone, showing a news article with Dr. Thompson's photo. She was just named Doctor of the Decade by the World Medical Association. She flies around the world saving lives. Brooks's face turned red. He looked from the flight attendant's phone to Dr. Thompson, then back again. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. These could all be fake news articles, Brooks insisted, his voice getting louder. Anyone can make a website these days, unless she can prove she owns that jet. Just then, the terminal doors opened. The airport's chief of security, Mr. James Martinez, rushed in. He had received alerts about the viral videos already spreading online. Hashtag Thompson Locked was trending on Twitter, and news vans were pulling up outside the airport. Dr. Thompson, Mr. Martinez said, slightly out of breath. I cannot apologize enough for this situation. I just saw the videos online. Please, let me personally escort you to your jet. Brooks stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. The crowd had grown even larger. Some people were live streaming the scene, narrating what was happening to their followers. The whole world is watching this, someone in the crowd said. My friend in London just texted me about it. Dr. Thompson looked at her watch. She had lost 45 minutes dealing with this situation. Somewhere in Geneva, people were waiting for her speech about healthcare equality. The irony wasn't lost on her. She would now have a powerful new example to share. The young flight attendant stepped closer to Dr. Thompson. I'm so sorry this happened to you. You've inspired so many of us. My cousin had a brain tumor last year, and your research helped save her life. Mr. Martinez turned to Brooks, his face stern. Mr. Brooks, please hand over your security badge. You're suspended pending a full investigation. The crowd murmured in approval. Brooks's hands shook as he unpinned his badge. All his years of prejudice had finally caught up with him, and it had happened in the most public way possible. As Dr. Thompson gathered her scattered documents, she noticed something remarkable. The cleaning lady who had watched everything was quietly crying. My grandson, she said softly to Dr. Thompson, he wants to be a doctor, but people keep telling him it's impossible. Today, you showed him it's not. The morning sun had risen higher now, its light filling the terminal. Dr. Thompson could see news helicopters circling outside. Her phone was flooded with messages of support from around the world. What started as a normal Thursday morning had turned into something much bigger. As Mr. Martinez led her toward her jet, Dr. Thompson realized this incident would change more than just one airport's policies. It would start a conversation that was long overdue. As Mr. Martinez escorted Dr. Thompson toward her jet, neither of them expected what they would find outside the terminal. In just 45 minutes, the story had exploded across social media. Now, a crowd of reporters waited near the runway, their cameras ready. Dr. Thompson, how do you feel about what just happened? One reporter shouted. Another called out, will you press charges against the airport? The questions came from all directions. Dr. Thompson paused for a moment. She looked at her watch. She still had time to make her UN speech if she left now. But something told her this moment was important too. She turned to face the reporters, her voice clear and strong. Today, I experienced something that happens to many people every day, she began. The only difference is that my story was caught on camera. The reporters went quiet, their cameras focusing on her face. Inside the terminal, the suspended guard Brooks watched through the window. His face had lost all its previous confidence. On a nearby TV screen, his actions were already being shown on the news, his name becoming famous for all the wrong reasons. The young flight attendant who had helped identify Dr. Thompson rushed out with a bottle of water. You must be thirsty after all this, she said kindly. Her name tag read Sarah Williams, and her hands shook slightly as she offered the water. Dr. Thompson thanked her and took a small sip before continuing to speak. I fly around the world performing emergency surgeries. Just last week, I'd operated on a child in Tokyo, a teacher in London, and a farmer in Kenya. Disease doesn't care about the color of your skin, and neither should we. As she spoke, more airport workers gathered around. The cleaning lady who had mentioned her grandson was there too, holding her phone up proudly as she recorded everything. My private jet isn't a luxury, Dr. Thompson explained. It's a tool that helps me save lives. When someone needs emergency brain surgery, every minute counts. That's why today's delay wasn't just an insult to me, it could have cost someone their life. Mr. Martinez stepped forward. We are implementing immediate changes in our security training, he announced. What happened today will never happen again at this airport. Just then, Dr. Thompson's phone buzzed with an urgent message. A 16-year-old girl in Geneva needed emergency surgery. The girl's doctors had specifically requested Dr. Thompson's help. I have to go now, Dr. Thompson told the reporters. There's a teenage girl in Geneva who needs my help. But before I leave, I want to say something important. She paused, making sure all cameras were recording. To every child who has been told they don't belong somewhere, to every person who has faced discrimination, remember this: your dreams are valid, your presence is valid, and sometimes the people who try to stop you end up making you famous for all the right reasons. The crowd broke into applause. Sarah Williams, the flight attendant, wiped tears from her eyes. Even some of the reporters were nodding in appreciation. As Dr. Thompson walked toward her jet, she saw her pilot standing at attention. Captain Rodriguez had been watching everything on his phone while waiting. "Doctor," he said with respect, "it's an honor to fly you today." The sleek white jet stood ready on the runway, its engines already warming up. On its side, in elegant blue letters, was the name Thompson Medical Solutions. Below that was the company motto, "Saving lives knows no boundaries." Before boarding, Dr. Thompson turned one last time to the cameras. "I'll be back next week," she said. "I have 3 surgeries scheduled here in New York. And yes, I'll be using the private terminal again." As she climbed the stairs to her jet, her phone buzzed again. The hashtag Thompson Soars was now trending worldwide. But Dr. Thompson wasn't thinking about that. Her mind was already in Geneva, focused on the teenage girl who needed her help. The jet's door closed behind her, and within minutes, it was racing down the runway, lifting into the bright morning sky. Below, dozens of phones recorded its takeoff, capturing the moment when discrimination met its match in dignity and grace. At 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Dr. Thompson's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her team had finally turned it back on after takeoff, and hundreds of messages poured in. World leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people from every continent were reaching out to support her. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "Dr. Thompson, the United Nations has just called. They want to change your speech topic. They're asking if you'll share today's experience." Dr. Thompson sat in her comfortable leather seat, looking out at the clouds below. She thought about Brooks, the security guard, and wondered if he understood what his actions had started. Back in New York, the story was growing bigger by the minute. Major news channels played the videos on repeat. Social media couldn't talk about anything else. Hashtag Thompson Soars had been joined by hashtag End Discrimination and hashtag Saving Lives. Sarah Williams, the brave flight attendant who had spoken up, was being interviewed on live television. "Dr. Thompson visits our terminal twice a week," she explained, wiping tears from her eyes. "She's always kind to everyone. Last month, she even helped our janitor's wife get special medical treatment." The cleaning lady with the grandson who wanted to be a doctor had shared her own video online. It showed Dr. Thompson's dignified response to discrimination. The video had already received millions of views, and teachers were showing it in classrooms across America. Meanwhile, in Geneva, something extraordinary was happening. When word spread about the incident, people began gathering outside the United Nations building. They held signs reading "Welcome Dr. Thompson" and "Heroes come in all colors." The teenage girl waiting for surgery in Geneva had posted a message online. "Dear Dr. Thompson, please don't let them stop you from reaching me. You're my only hope." Her post had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. Back at JFK Airport, changes were already taking place. Mr. Martinez had called an emergency meeting with all security staff. "From today, we treat everyone with respect," he announced. "We just lost one of our best doctors for 45 minutes because of prejudice. This stops now." Brooks, the suspended guard, sat alone in the airport cafeteria, watching his face appear on TV screens everywhere. His own daughter had texted him, "Dad, how could you? Dr. Thompson saved Uncle Mike's life last year." The weight of his actions was finally sinking in. Dr. Thompson's medical team in Geneva sent updates about their young patient. They had everything ready for her arrival. The girl's parents had decorated her hospital room with newspaper clippings about Dr. Thompson's achievements, giving their daughter hope. On social media, something beautiful was happening. People began sharing their own stories of facing discrimination, but now they added messages of hope, inspired by Dr. Thompson's response. She showed us how to rise above hate with dignity. One viral post read. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Dr. Thompson, we're getting special clearance to land ahead of schedule. Geneva Air Traffic Control says it's their way of saying sorry for what happened in New York. Looking at her phone one last time before landing, Dr. Thompson saw a message that touched her heart. It was from the cleaning lady's grandson. Dear Dr. Thompson, today you showed me that nothing is impossible. I'm going to study twice as hard to become a doctor like you. Major airlines started announcing new training programs to prevent discrimination. Private jet companies issued statements promising to review their security procedures. What happened to Dr. Thompson had started a chain reaction of positive change. As her jet began its descent into Geneva, Dr. Thompson finished updating her UN speech. She would tell her story, not to shame anyone, but to show how one moment of discrimination can either break you or make you stronger. The sun was setting over Geneva as her plane touched down. Through the window, she could see the crowd waiting. They held phones and cameras, but also something more important. They held hope that her story would help change the world. Dr. Thompson gathered her medical files, ready to head straight to the hospital. She had shown the world how to face discrimination with grace, but right now, she had a young life to save. That, after all, was what mattered most. The sun had set over Geneva by the time Dr. Thompson finished the emergency surgery. For 6 intense hours, she had focused on saving the teenage girl's life, putting aside the morning's events and the world's reaction to them. She's going to be fine, Dr. Thompson told awaiting parents, still wearing her surgical scrubs. The mother hugged her tightly, whispering thank you in French. The father, who had watched the viral videos of the airport incident, couldn't hold back his tears. You went through all that this morning and still came to save our daughter, he asked in broken English. Dr. Thompson simply smiled and patted his shoulder. This was why she fought so hard to keep flying, to reach people who needed her help. Outside the hospital, reporters from every major news network had gathered. The story had grown even bigger during her surgery. Former patients from around the world had started sharing their stories of how Dr. Thompson had saved their lives. Sarah Williams, the flight attendant from JFK, had appeared on 3 more TV shows. Dr. Thompson once delayed her own birthday party to fly to Mexico for an emergency surgery, she told the reporters. She's not just a doctor. She's an angel in disguise. Back in New York, things were changing fast. The airport had announced new policies named the Thompson Protocol, strict guidelines to prevent discrimination. Security staff would now undergo monthly training sessions about treating everyone with respect. Brooks, the suspended guard, had made a public apology. His daughter had convinced him to face his mistakes. I let my prejudice blind me, he admitted on national television. I couldn't see past my own bias to recognize a true hero standing in front of me. Dr. Thompson's phone showed hundreds of missed calls. The White House had called twice. The United Nations Secretary General wanted to meet her personally. 3 major medical schools had offered her honorary degrees, but she was focused on reading the brain scans of her teenage patient. The cleaning lady's grandson had become a minor celebrity at his school. News crews interviewed him about his dream of becoming a doctor. Dr. Thompson showed me that the color of your skin doesn't determine your worth, he said. It's what you do for others that matters. In the hospital cafeteria, Dr. Thompson finally sat down for her first proper meal of the day. On the TV screen above her, she saw her own face next to breaking news headlines. But her attention was on the medical papers spread across the table, planning another surgery for tomorrow. Her personal assistant brought updates from around the world. Multiple airlines had fired staff for similar discriminatory behavior. Private jet terminals across America were rushing to update their training programs. The incident had sparked a global conversation about prejudice in professional settings. The teenage patient's latest scans showed the surgery had been successful. In the recovery room, the girl's walls were now covered with #ThompsonSoars posters. She would make a full recovery, adding another life to the thousands Dr. Thompson had saved. Mr. Martinez from JFK had called again. Doctor, we've started a scholarship program in your name, he said in a voicemail. We want to help minority students pursue medical careers. Your experience is changing lives in ways you never imagined. As night fell over Geneva, Dr. Thompson finally allowed herself to rest. In her hotel room, she watched some of the news coverage. The incident had become more than just a viral moment, it was becoming a movement for change. Her phone buzzed with another message. It was from the cleaning lady's grandson. Dr. Thompson, my science teacher showed your videos in class today. The whole class stood up and clapped. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Tomorrow, she would give her UN speech. She would talk about healthcare inequality, but now she had a powerful new example. Her experience had shown how prejudice could delay crucial medical care, and why fighting discrimination wasn't just about dignity, it was about saving lives. Dr. Thompson turned off the TV and looked out at the Geneva lights. In less than 24 hours, one guard's prejudice had sparked a worldwide conversation about change. But for her, the biggest victory wasn't in the viral videos or policy changes. It was in the steady beeping of a heart monitor, showing that her teenage patient would live to see another day. The United Nations Assembly Hall was packed. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls. Dr. Thompson walked onto the stage, still wearing her surgical scrubs. She had just finished another emergency surgery, saving a young teacher's life just an hour before. Yesterday morning, I was just a doctor trying to reach my patients, she began. Today, I stand before you as a symbol of something bigger. The room fell silent, hundreds of phones recording her every word. Her teenage patient from yesterday had insisted on watching the speech from her hospital bed. The girl was recovering well, already able to smile and squeeze her parents' hands. Nurses had set up a special TV in her room to stream the UN speech live. In New York, Brooks, the former security guard, watched from his living room. His daughter sat beside him, holding his hand. On his coffee table lay job offers from diversity training companies. They wanted him to share his story, to help others learn from his mistakes. Discrimination isn't just about hurt feelings. Dr. Thompson continued at the UN. When you stop a doctor from reaching their patient, when you delay emergency care because of prejudice, you put lives at risk. Today, I want to talk about how bias in healthcare kills. The cleaning lady's grandson sat in his school auditorium, watching with his entire class. His science teacher had organized a special viewing session. On his desk lay acceptance letters from 3 medical summer programs, all offering him scholarships after hearing his story. Sarah Williams, the brave flight attendant, had been invited to attend the speech in person. She sat in the front row, remembering how her own cousin had been saved by Dr. Thompson's surgery last year. Now, she was part of a story that would help save many more lives. Back at JFK Airport, Mr. Martinez was implementing the new Thompson Protocol. Security staff watched training videos showing how discrimination could have deadly consequences. Every minute we delay, someone could be their last minute to save a life, the video explained. Dr. Thompson shared statistics about healthcare inequality, but now they weren't just numbers. She told stories of patients who nearly died because prejudiced people delayed their care. She talked about brilliant doctors who quit medicine because of discrimination. But today, something is changing, she said, her voice growing stronger. In the past 48 hours, 20 major hospitals have started anti-bias training programs. 15 airports have updated their security protocols. And thousands of young people have applied to medical schools, saying they were inspired by what happened. The television networks carried her speech live. In homes, offices, and schools across the world, people stopped to listen. Her words weren't just about one incident at an airport. They were about changing the way people think and act. Outside the UN building, a group of medical students held a rally. They carried signs reading "Future Dr. Thompsons" and "Judge by skills, not skin." Many wore surgical scrubs in solidarity, representing the future of medicine they wanted to see. Dr. Thompson's phone lit up with a message from her team in New York. Another emergency case needed her help. Without missing a beat, she began wrapping up her speech. Her patients would always come first. Yesterday, one person's prejudice tried to stop me from saving lives, she said. But today, thousands of people are working to make sure that never happens again. Change doesn't come from angry words or revenge. It comes from turning bad moments into teaching moments. As she finished speaking, the entire UN assembly stood up, applauding. But Dr. Thompson was already walking off stage, checking her patient's scans on her tablet. She had made her point. Now it was time to get back to work. The cleaning lady's grandson raised his hand in class. "Teacher," he said proudly, "I know what I'm writing my college essay about now. I'm going to write about the day Dr. Thompson showed us that sometimes the best revenge is success." In her hospital bed, the teenage patient smiled as she watched Dr. Thompson leave the UN stage. On her bedside table sat a handwritten note from the doctor. "Your life matters. Your dreams matter. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." 1 month had passed since the incident at JFK Airport. Dr. Thompson's private jet touched down on the same runway where her story had begun. This time, everything was different. As she walked into the private terminal, she saw new faces at the security desk. Large photos hung on the walls showing diverse medical professionals who regularly used the terminal. Her own picture was there, but she hadn't asked for it. The airport staff had insisted. The new security team stood up respectfully. They had all been trained under the Thompson Protocol, which was now being used at airports across the country. But what made Dr. Thompson smile wasn't the special treatment. It was seeing who was leading the training session in the corner. Brooks, her former guard, sat with a group of new employees. He wasn't wearing a security uniform anymore. Instead, he wore a suit and carried a briefcase full of training materials. After his public apology, he had taken a new job, teaching others how to recognize and overcome their prejudices. "Dr. Thompson," Brooks said, standing up when he saw her, "may I speak with you for a moment?" His daughter, who now worked as a diversity coordinator at the airport, stood nearby, watching proudly. The cleaning lady's grandson was there too. He had started an internship program that Mr. Martinez created, allowing high school students to learn about aviation and medicine. He wore a badge that read "Future Doctor" and carried medical textbooks in his backpack. "My first college acceptance letter came yesterday," he told Dr. Thompson excitedly. "The scholarship is named after you." Several medical schools had created Thompson scholarships for minority students interested in emergency medicine. Sarah Williams, the flight attendant who had spoken up that day, had been promoted to head of customer relations. She had started a program helping medical professionals get through security faster. "Time saves lives," read the new signs above her desk. Dr. Thompson's phone buzzed. A message from her teenage patient in Geneva. The girl had fully recovered and was now planning to study medicine herself. She had started a social media campaign called "Thank You, Dr. Thompson," where patients shared stories of doctors who had faced discrimination but kept saving lives. The terminal itself had been renamed the Thompson Medical Aviation Center. A plaque near the entrance read, "Where every second counts, prejudice has no place." Airlines across the world had copied this message for their own terminals. Mr. Martinez approached with exciting news. The Thompson Protocol had just been adopted by every major airport in America. "Your experience changed everything," he said. "We've trained over 10,000 staff members in the past month alone." As Dr. Thompson checked in for her flight, she had 3 surgeries scheduled in 3 different countries tomorrow. She noticed something remarkable. The terminal was more diverse than ever. Doctors of all backgrounds moved through security smoothly, each focused on their mission to save lives. Brooks stood up again, this time addressing his whole class. "See that doctor there?" he said, pointing respectfully toward Dr. Thompson. "1 month ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life by judging her by her appearance. Today, I teach others to be better than I was." The cleaning lady appeared with her mop, but now she wore a supervisor's badge too. The airport had promoted her after hearing how she had always treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position or appearance. "My grandson got his second acceptance letter today," she told Dr. Thompson proudly. Outside the terminal windows, Dr. Thompson's jet waited on the runway. Its new paint job included a small message under her company logo: "Breaking barriers, saving lives." The message had become a hashtag, a movement, and now a reality. As she walked toward her plane, Dr. Thompson heard the intercom announcement. "Attention all staff. This is your daily reminder. The Thompson Protocol, treating everyone with dignity saves lives." Looking back at the terminal one last time, she saw Brooks teaching his class, Sarah helping another doctor through security, and the cleaning lady's grandson studying his medical books. One moment of discrimination had sparked a chain reaction of positive change. Her pilot met her at the stairs of the jet. "Ready to save more lives, Doctor?" he asked with a smile. Dr. Thompson nodded. climbing aboard. The world had changed in the past month, but her mission remained the same: to reach those who needed her help, no matter what barriers stood in her way.